You are currently the only person in this conference.
Okay. This is the lecture end of the course, and this is where you're going to see all your grades pop up. All right. So again, setup is very similar, but you're going to see other things here. In the calendar, you'll notice that you've got your lectures, but you also have your assessments, okay, which will be assessments both for lab and for lecture over here. All right. So again, if you want to access any of these components, all you have to do is hit the link and it'll take you straight to it. Okay. The content end, all right, has got a few other components compared to the lab section. All right. And that's because there are going to be lecture exams and lab quizzes and lab practicals in addition to what we have available in terms of notes and podcasts. So again, the course syllabus is the same syllabus as before, and that's just the link to get Acrobat Reader, okay? The exams you can get to either from hitting the calendar or from going here. Now, if you're interested in a different look to the calendar, you can go to Tools, and you can hit Calendar, and you'll get a calendar like laid out in a month grid. And it's the same deal. If you hit the links in the calendar, it'll take you to those assessments, right? So obviously everything has a due date, which is going to be on Saturday when we meet, all right? So again, different ways to get to the material, all right? The lecture exams, all right, here are all true, false, multiple choice, 50 questions, all right, and you get an hour to do them. And the hour dedicated to those is going to be on the back end of the lecture. So on syllabus days when we have an actual lecture, the lecture will come first, the exam will be on the back end, okay? You want to get it done within the time limit because the exam's going to go poof at the end of class time, right? You'll be locked out, and that'll be it. Those will be your responses. So make sure and get through it as if it were an actual exam, okay? And that means that obviously we don't want you using reference material while you're taking these things because that would constitute cheating, right? So that's one of the reasons we have it timed. The questions are scrambled, and that way you can't share information. All right, so it's a lot like a real-time exam. All right, I told you guys earlier that one of the things I had as a way to get ready for the exams are these practice exams down here. All right, so these are a little bit different. What you have here are study guides. All right, if you know what's in the study guide, you can answer those questions. You're prepared for the practice exam, all right? You hit the practice exam, it'll pop up, all right? And there is a key with it, right? And the key is going to be on the last page, but don't look at the key. And these are questions, right? Just fill it out like you'd fill out a regular exam, and then check yourself against the key, and then see how you do. All right, and that is an indication of how prepared you are for the real exam. Okay, so we've got one for each exam, and you can think of these as training exercises. The other thing you can do, of course, to practice and get ready is to take advantage of all the stuff that's posted, to fill out your notes, all right? And then if you have questions that you're having trouble answering, you can get me by email. That's probably the best way to get me. Or you can get me during office hours from 5 to 7, and I'll post a Zoom link for that, okay? Because I get students from other schools where I teach coming in as well as you guys, all right? So those are the study. Yes, ma'am.
What if we have questions during the lab or during the lecture?
Like, that'll be for the end. Yeah, that'll be for the end. So I'll leave some space at the end for questions.
Okay.
So basically we'll run the talk, and then we'll stop, and we'll have Q&A time. Okay. When I run this course as a live course, one of the things I do is I mix up lecture and lab, so that I mix up live and podcast, so that we have time during lecture to actually answer these kinds of questions. Okay, and that's because there's so much content in what we cover that if I were to live talk about everything, I would be talking the whole time. So in order to deal with that in this environment, what I'm going to do is just save space at the end for questions. If we don't finish everything we're going to talk about in that block of time, remember that the podcasts are there for you to finish up that material. And so you will get full coverage, even though we may cut short for questions, say in the back 10 minutes of a regular lecture. Okay, so that's I think the best way to go about it. The lab quizzes are going to be here, all right, and those will pop up and be available on this course site, but they are part of your lab grade, but they go into the grade book on this side, because the grade book here has all your lab grades and your lecture grades all together, okay? And it's just easier to do that, have everything load up at the same time in the same place, and that way you can keep track of how you're doing. And then the practicals are here, okay? And it's the same deal, is you can get to them through the calendar, or you can get to them through here. Notice that they have dates where they pop and dates where they end, which correspond to those times in the syllabus when you're going to actually be doing that work. Okay. So,
excuse me.
Yes, ma'am.
Before we move on, I clicked on the exams right now because I kind of looked through it before, and I like what I saw, what you were seeing on the screen, like the practices exam. I cannot see it. I have like exam number 3. Well, when I clicked on exams, have exam number 4, 5.
Are you in the practice exam area or in the exam area?
I do not see how you go to the practice exam area.
All the way in the bottom.
Oh! Practice exams with keys.
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
Got you. Okay, I see it now. Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Oh, another question.
Yes.
I looked at this Khan Academy. It wants me to have a class code with your name. I punched in
you don't have to do that. That's not necessary. You can just sign up for free and search around.
Oh, it's sign up for free.
Yeah.
So I have a question, teacher.
Yes.
I have a question on my e-learn. I don't see anything that you said right here, or practice exam or quiz. I don't see anything.
Okay. Are you in 1141?
Yes.
Okay. Are you in content?
Yes.
Okay. Now, if you go
I
down,
don't see any. I don't see any courses right there on the 2000 the fall 2020. I just see summer. That the last courses I have done.
okay. All right. When you go out here,
Hmm.
right, to your home page, you don't see our course listed at all.
No,
Okay. Hold on. So we're not popping up in here at all in any of these.
no.
Okay. When did you register?
Um, Last summer in the summertime, last semester.
Oh, you mean this past summer?
So I
Okay.
registered the area.
Yeah.
So whenever you posted anything, I won't see anything or calls. I don't see anything.
Okay. So that probably means that they. What's the last name? Okay.
UWIZEYIAMANA.
Okay. So what I'll probably have to do, you'll want to email me, all right,
Mhm.
and then I want to make sure that you're registered, all right, so that
I
you.
did. I did. I called to the
No, I mean that you're
advisor.
yeah that you're registered and that you're also
Yeah, they
in.
told me that I have to tell you, figure out how you can set up on my e-learn.
Right, right. I'm going to have to enroll you. Okay. So
I
if you
emailed
email me,
you. I
huh?
emailed you last 3 days ago. You didn't answer me.
Okay. So what I'll do is I'll do that after class today. I'll go ahead and get you enrolled. Okay. What I can do now
Hmm.
is I can go here and we can go to people, class list. All right. Let's go to add participants. Okay.
It's a Louise Imana.
Okay. And then search for, let's do last name. Okay.
UWIZEYIMANA.
UW, and then what's
I
it?
Z.
I
Yes.
S
Z. No, UWIZEYIMANA.
IMANA. Like that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Let's look.
Louise, yes, Louise Imana. Huh?
There we go.
Yeah, even Lab too.
Yeah. And let's go ahead and hit you in there. Oh, section. Here we go. Here. There we go. Section of user. Yeah.
The R I see there, it's for 2019.
Let's see.
You might need to select set all roles and set all sections maybe up above there and then hit submit.
I did. Well, we can try that. Let's do that and do that. And then let's try it again. There we go. Now you're in. Okay. It should pop now. You should be able to see it.
Okay.
Okay. And then I'll do the same for lab when we take our break. All right. Cool. So let me know if it pops up or if it doesn't. Okay.
So Louise Imana, that is my last name. My first
Right.
name is Louise.
Yeah. It has you in here. You should be enrolled now.
Okay.
Yeah, it should pop up. It should
All
be
right.
visible. Yeah. Because if we go to 2,
Mm-hmm.
It should show you at the bottom. And there you are. Okay.
Mhm.
So you should be in there. So now when you refresh, you should see
Okay.
our Okay. All right. The rest of the organization of the course, right?
Mhm.
If you go here, chapter 1, that's today.
Okay.
You've got the PDFs, which are the notes, right? Which you'll fill out while we talk. And then you've got video podcast for a portion of the lecture, all right? This, of course, will
Mhm.
be completed a total podcast because we're recording what we're doing right now. And then same for the rest of the chapter, right? You'll see video podcasts available. And most of these, the ones that don't have video podcasts for them, we're going to generate them as we go through the course this term. Okay, so because we're recording everything that we're doing, we're actually producing the video podcast while we're here in lecture, which means you could go back and review it at any time. Okay, so just remember to download your notes, have them available, and then during lecture, you write down the important topics, and then when you go back and review the podcast, fill in any details. Okay. All right. Let me do. Okay. All right. So each lecture is laid out that way. In addition, all right, with each chapter, there's going to be some video content, and when you go into the video content, you'll see that they're broken down by chapter. All right. There's chapter 1 video content, chapter 2 video content, and so on. All right. So this is stuff that's normally embedded in the presentation. All right. But the presentation is a very large file when it has a movie embedded in it. So I just give you guys the PDFs and then the links to the podcast and also to the video content. All right. So there's and they're all going to be available either as QuickTime files or as real player files. Okay, a QuickTime file is going to have a .mov extension at the end of it, and a real player file is going to have a .rm extension next to it. Now, real player is at realplayer.com and it's free, and QuickTime is at quicktime.com and it's also free. All right. To download, all you have to do is hit the arrow. All right, and then you can hit download. If you want to watch the topic, you click on it, all right, and it'll take you to that file. Sometimes it'll display within the browser, sometimes it won't, okay? You can always download it and watch it on your computer if it doesn't display within your browser. A nice thing to do with these videos is to sort of use them as an introduction to important concepts that you might want to go back and review that maybe went by a little bit too quickly in lecture, okay? Down here you've got the same useful bookmarks that we had over on the lab side, all right? So same stuff. Like I said, I'll fix the ones that are busted. And the practice exams with keys and the study guides, okay? So all of that available for you to take advantage of, okay? Now, as far as grading goes, and this is something that we didn't get into too much during lab. We go back to the syllabus, okay? What you're going to see is that everything that's highlighted on the syllabus in yellow or with red writing, right? That's something that's due, okay? So that's to call your attention to it. We have a break on the 28th for Thanksgiving, all right? And then down here, this is the point distribution, right? Lecture exams 1 through 6, 100 points each, and then there's an optional comprehensive final. But the way this works is it either substitutes for your lowest lecture exam grade, okay, if you take it, or if you don't take it, it becomes your lowest lecture exam grade. Now, it is comprehensive, all right, which means it goes over everything that we've covered during the term. And then the lab components are here, right? So those are the 3 lab practicals, and then the lab quizzes collectively are 50 points, okay? And none of those are dropped. And then there's 25 extra credit points. Now there's 2 ways to get that, all right? The 25 extra credit points you can get either by perfect attendance, okay, or you can get that by submitting a disease paper. Now, what are the specifics on the disease paper? Well, go to the course announcements, right? And you'll see an old announcement on submission of a disease paper. So you go down here, extra credit paper specifics, okay? And the way this works, all right, is that you pick a disease that is going to impact a system that we've talked about this term. So this term, we're going to do cell biology, tissues. We're going to do muscle, skeleton. We're going to do nervous, all right? So any disease that hits those, all right, I want to know the name of the disease, the signs and symptoms, and what the treatments are, or if there are no treatments, why there are no treatments, and how they work. And then it has to be referenced, right? So 5 pages, which includes the title page, but does not include the reference page. So basically 4 pages of text, double spaced, 12 point, and you can use MLA or APA format, it doesn't matter, okay? You can also use interviews with people that suffer from those conditions as reference material, all right? So anything you pull from another source, whether it's an interview or something out of a book or a paper or a website, you have to indicate that in the text, and then you have to have a bibliography at the end telling me where you got that information from. You can't just pull it out of thin air, okay? So you can do either one of those, all right? If you don't dig right in papers, then by all means go and do the perfect attendance, right? But again, attendance is one of those things that obviously during exam weeks and practical weeks, you're going to have to be here. And I want you to be here when we're talking, even though you can pick this up on podcast or on recorded lecture. If you're not here live to ask questions, then what happens is that you miss out on some of the important points. Okay, so that's basically the setup. Now, today, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the overview of the course in terms of subject matter, right? So we're going to introduce you to anatomy and physiology, and then we're going to kind of give you a, let's see, let's do these, do this 5 to 7. And we'll say Zoom here.
I have a question.
Zoom or cell phone.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Everything has a due date?
Yes.
Okay.
Everything.
The disease paper, extra credit?
Last day of class for the paper.
That's for last day class.
Yes.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So we start with chapter 1, right? The human body. And that's what we're going to be studying this term, right? What the human body is made up of and how the parts of the human body work. All right. So that's me. The office is the office at Sinclair's main campus. Now, obviously, we're not using that now. So you're going to get a hold of me by email or cell phone, or you're going to use Zoom. Okay. That's my cell. All right. And that's my email. And then those are my virtual hours. Okay. So make note of that, and that's when you can get me. Okay. Now, the course is called Anatomy and Physiology, right? What is anatomy? It's the structure of an object, all right? So if we were to ask the question, what's the anatomy of a screwdriver, right? It would have a handle and a shaft and a head, okay? Anatomy is important in understanding how the human body works. It tells you where the parts are, what they look like, okay, and where they are relative to each other. But it's limited in the sense that that's really only part of the entire puzzle of how the human body operates, right? You not only have to know what the parts are, what they're called, and where they're located, you also have to know what they do. And that's really the physiology part of the course. Anatomy can have subdivisions, right? Gross anatomy is anything you can see with the naked eye, and microscopic anatomy is only visible using a microscope, right? So gross anatomy would be things like regional or surface anatomy. Examples might include the anatomy of the cephalic region, the head, okay, or the anatomy of the thoracic region, which is the chest, okay. Microscopic anatomy would be things like what do the parts of the cell look like? That'd be cytology. Or what do tissues look like? And that would be histology. Tissues are groups of cells that do something as a team that a single cell can't do on its own. And then there's developmental anatomy, which is the changes that we go through from fertilization until birth. Okay, and examples include embryology, right? In order to understand anatomy and physiology, we have to be able to understand the language that's used in this course. And that's one of the biggest challenges for a lot of students to take this, is that a lot of the terms come from the Greek and the Latin. And when they see them for the first time, they don't know what they mean. So one of the things that's going to help you in this course is to either get a website or a textbook or get a book out of the library on medical terminology. Because the ancient Greeks and the Romans got to the human body first, and they named everything. They got the naming rights. So that means that we have to learn their language in order to talk about the human body. And if you understand some medical terminology where it talks to you about prefixes, word roots, and suffixes, then when you read the textbook, it'll make more sense to you. You won't have to stop every time you see a word you don't know and ask, well, what does that mean? Okay? I'll break down some words as we go through the lecture and give you meaning, all right? But it's important that you kind of help yourself with this on your own as well. And, you know, a good source is Khan Academy, right? They have a medical terminology subheading. There's everything in Khan Academy, from how to bake an apple pie to understanding particle physics. It's all in there somewhere, okay? So it's like a huge encyclopedia. You want to be able to observe things and record what you observe. You want to be able to manipulate stuff. You want to be able to palpate stuff, which means to feel it. And you want to be able to listen to stuff, okay? Because there are sounds that come from the body that indicate whether or not things are properly functioning. Physiology is just the study of the body's function, all right? So there are subdivisions of this based on different body systems, such as renal physiology or pulmonary physiology or cardiovascular physiology, all right? The physiology is the what is it for part of the course, right? Where is it, what is it for, okay? It often focuses on the cellular and molecular level, and its abilities, its function depend on chemical reactions. So we're going to have to learn some chemistry in this course as well. Okay. To study physiology, we have to focus at a lot of different levels, from systemic to cellular down to molecular. We have to study basic physical principles, such as principles of electrical current, pressure, and movement. And we have to study chemical principles as well. All right. So we're going to get into some of that in order to understand what we're talking about when we discuss things like the mechanics of breathing or how a nerve cell works. Okay. So that's a necessary component in the course. Function always reflects structure, okay? An engineer would say that structure follows function, all right? In other words, the reason that you see certain features in an object is because that object has a job to do, okay? If we go back to the screwdriver, right? A screwdriver's anatomy is a handle, a shaft, and a head, okay? So why does it have those parts? Well, the handle is so that you can grip it. The shaft is so that you can transfer the force from the handle to the head, which will either be a Phillips head or a flat head or some other shape. And that's to engage the screw so that you can screw it into wood or to drywall or into metal, okay? And so all the parts are there for a purpose. There's nothing that you're going to see in anatomy and physiology, and there aren't going to be any features that are decorative, that are there for no reason, okay? They're all there for a purpose, all right? The levels of organization of the human body start at the chemical level, where we have atoms that can connect to each other to become molecules, molecules that can become macromolecules, and then macromolecules that can become organelles, which are little chambers inside cells that carry out certain processes effectively so the cell can survive. And then there's the cellular level. The cell is the smallest unit of living matter, okay? And then tissues, which are groups of cells that have a similar makeup, similar characteristics, that can do something as a team that a single cell can't. Then you have an organ, which is two or more tissue types working together to do something a single tissue can't, and an organ system, which are organs that work closely together, okay? Basically, the organ is a group of tissues that does something a single tissue can't, and an organ system is a collection of organs that do something that a single organ can't. And then finally, the organism is the entire body. That's you, okay? So we go from small to big in order to understand the pieces that make up the collectively larger and larger aspects of the human body, right? If we understand things about the smaller parts, we can understand things about the bigger parts, okay? So that's why we go from small to big. We can take an example such as a look at the human body from the aspect of atoms becoming molecules, becoming macromolecules, becoming organelles. That organelle happens to be something called a mitochondria. Organelles cluster together to form the smallest unit of living matter, which is the cell. In this case, it's a smooth muscle cell. And then smooth muscle cells together make up a tissue. Smooth muscle tissue does something a single smooth muscle cell can't, right? And then combinations of tissues make up an organ. So this is a cross-section through a blood vessel, and you'll see an epithelial layer. That's one type of tissue. A smooth muscle layer, that's another type of tissue, and a connective tissue layer, that's another type of tissue. And if we were to go even further, we would even see some nervous tissue in here as well, okay? And a blood vessel is part of the circulatory system. It's an organ in the circulatory system. And the circulatory system itself is made up of the heart, the arteries, the veins, the blood that they carry, the capillaries, all right? And it works together with all the other body systems to allow the organism to survive, okay? So that's how we go from small to big. And you want to be able to understand this hierarchy and recreate it, because that might be a question on an exam, right? Which level is the tiniest? Which level is the biggest, okay? Now, when we talk about life, right, I told you that the cell was the smallest unit of living matter. There are certain characteristics that all life has, okay? All life has a boundary layer, right? There is an inside and an outside to a living thing, okay? For the cell, the boundary is the cell membrane. For the human body, the boundary is the skin, okay? Or the mucous membranes. All living things move, okay? And you might wonder, well, plants don't move. Well, actually they do, okay? They move in response to the sun, and if you were to look at plant cells, you would see that the little organelles and the cytoplasm inside the plant cells moves around too, okay? So there's always movement. Without movement, there isn't any chemical reactions. Okay, and without any chemical reactions, there's not going to be any life. Responsiveness, meaning that the organism can do something about changes in its environment. So, an example in a single-celled organism would be something called positive and negative chemotaxis, right? A cell that has positive chemotaxis will move towards an environment that promotes its survival and away from an environment that does not, okay? In the human body, responsiveness is the result of the nervous system communicating to other body systems so that we can get ourselves out of danger, for instance, in response to certain stimuli. All right, if we couldn't do this, we wouldn't survive very long. Right, we wouldn't know how to move within and manipulate our environment in a way that allows us to live. Okay, digestion. Right, all living things digest. Now, a single cell will digest through a process known as pinocytosis or phagocytosis, and then it'll use an organelle called a lysosome to complete the process. For the human body, digestion is the act of the digestive system, which is made up of the teeth, tongue, salivary glands, the oral cavity, the pharynx or throat, the esophagus, the stomach, the small and large intestine, the liver, the pancreas, the gallbladder. Okay, all of those work together to do something that a single tissue or a single organ couldn't do, which is to mechanically and chemically break down our food and get it into our bloodstream where we can send it to all the other cells in the body. Okay, metabolism are just all the chemical reactions that promote survival. All right, so there are chemical reactions that build things up from tiny pieces, and there are chemical reactions that tear big things down and release energy as a result of that, and that energy is used to promote the survival of the organism. You got to get rid of waste products too, right? If you don't, you're going to create a toxic environment in which the cell or the tissue won't survive. Okay, examples of waste products in the human body include solid waste or feces, urine, sweat, all right, CO2, and urea and ammonia. Okay, and all of that, if it builds up, is going to cause the eventual shutdown of the body. All right, for the cell, the waste products are primarily things like nitrogenous waste, like ammonia and carbon dioxide. Okay, and that stuff can't be allowed to build up, or it'll create conditions in which the cell will die. All right, and then reproduction. All living things can make copies of themselves. Okay, for the single cell, that process is mitosis, where one cell reproduces its genetic information and then divides in a process called cytokinesis. It creates two new cells that look and act like the original. And then for the human, it's the process of fertilization, where the male and female gamete, the sperm and the egg, come together in the female reproductive tract to generate a zygote, which then implants in the uterus and develops into first an embryo and then a fetus and then a neonate. And then we have a new individual. Okay, now reproduction is not critical for the survival of a single organism, but it is critical for the survival of the species. Okay, human reproduction, for instance, is critical for the survival of the human species. All right, cellular reproduction is critical for the survival of anything. All right, if we don't have cellular reproduction, we're not going to be able to maintain a living organism. Right, and then growth. All living things increase in size and also change in characteristics over time. All right, and that reflects the fact that there are chemical reactions going on that are breaking down and building up new things. Okay, and the result of that is that the organism's appearance begins to change and its characteristics begin to change. So all of those we think of as life. Okay, and the cell can do all of those things, and that's why we call it the smallest unit of living matter. Okay. We've talked about plasma membrane and skin as boundaries, right? We've talked about movement, right? In the human body, the movement of body parts is the result of muscle tissue, okay? There's skeletal, smooth, and cardiac muscle, and they all perform contraction and generate movement. Then there's movement of substances, right? Cardiac and smooth muscle work without us having to think about them, okay? Skeletal muscle works with our conscious control, right? And then at the cellular level, okay, movement is the result of cytoskeletal components like actin and myosin, okay, and an energy source called ATP. Responsiveness, right, is the ability to respond to stimuli. For the human, that'd be things like the withdrawal reflex, or the ability to control our breathing rate, or even unconsciously control our blood pressure. For a single-celled organism, that would be the ability to run away from a toxic environment and run towards a beneficial one, okay, chemotaxis. And then digestion, right, breakdown of ingested foodstuffs for both single and multicellular organisms, right? The single-celled organism does it through phagocytosis or pinocytosis, and we do it using the digestive system, which breaks down what we eat into tinier molecules that are small enough to load into the blood, and then the blood carries that to the liver, and then the liver is going to distribute that to the rest of the body, okay? Metabolism, right? The chemical reactions that support life can be broken down into catabolism or anabolism, and without chemistry, there is no life, okay? Catabolic reactions take big things and tear them up, and then release energy from that, all right? And that energy is used to build things, and that's the anabolic reactions, where we take tiny things and connect them to each other in order to make a larger molecule, okay? So the energy from catabolism drives the anabolic reactions. Excretion is the removal of wastes from metabolism and digestion, and we talked about what those are and why we have to get rid of them. And reproduction is cellular division necessary for growth and repair and the production of offspring, okay? And then finally, growth is just an increase in size, right? And we could also say change over time, right? Other features change over time with an organism other than just size. And that also indicates life, okay? We are multicellular organisms, okay? And we are eukaryotic organisms, meaning that we have a true nucleus in our tissue, in our cells that make up our tissues, which means that it's a nucleus surrounded by a nuclear membrane, all right? It also means that our cellular structure is a little more complicated than single-celled organisms like bacteria, okay? We have to keep our individual cells alive, to keep our tissues alive, to keep our organs working, to keep our organ systems functioning, to keep the organ system working, okay? Our ability to survive, all right, is the result of the cooperation of several different organ systems, right? We use the respiratory system to take in oxygen and eliminate carbon dioxide. Now, you probably knew that for this course, but the reason we need oxygen is so that we can load it into the blood, which carries it to the tissues, and that allows the tissues to make the maximum amount of energy necessary in order to sustain life, okay? The removal of CO2 is critical because if it builds up in our tissues, it causes changes in the environment in our body that will end up killing us, all right? Specifically, it'll alter something called our pH, all right? Waste products in the blood are removed both by the respiratory and the urinary system, okay? The urinary system filters out toxins and nitrogenous waste from the blood, such as ammonia and urea, and puts it in our pee, and we can pee it out, all right? The digestive system takes in food that we ingest and chemically and mechanically breaks it down, all right, and then loads those molecules into the blood. From there, they go to the liver, and then from the liver, they'll get stored for a while at the liver, and then when the body needs those nutrients, the liver will release them into the blood, and then the pumping action of the heart will distribute the blood to the tissues of the body. The tissues will pull those nutrients out and use those for building blocks or for energy. And then it'll dump waste products into the blood, and then the blood will be cleaned by both the urinary and the respiratory system. And then whatever doesn't end up being absorbed as a nutrient into our bloodstream ends up as solid waste in the digestive system, and we poop it out as feces. Okay? All those systems have to work in order for us to survive. In fact, every system in our body needs to function for us to survive. All our body systems are interdependent, meaning that one depends on the other. Okay? And if we don't do that, if we shut down a system, then we're likely to die. Okay? We can take an example. Let's take a very simple example. Let's say we messed with the digestive system. Let's say that I sewed your mouth shut, all right? You couldn't get it open again. Well, what would happen? Well, you wouldn't be able to get any food or water, right? Which means what? No nutrients into the blood, which means what? No building blocks or energy for the tissues, okay? Which means they'll die. And as the tissues die, the organs will die, and the organ systems will shut down, right? You take the respiratory system, right? Let's say that I basically suffocated you. You're going to die. You know that already, right? But why? Well, because you're not getting any oxygen into the lungs, which means you're not getting any oxygen into the blood, which means you're not getting any oxygen into the tissues, which means the tissues can't make enough energy, chemical energy, for you to survive. Okay? Same thing if we were to stop waste removal, right? If we were to shut down the urinary system, for instance, then you wouldn't be able to get rid of ammonia and urea, and the pH in your body fluids would rise to the point where the cells and the tissues would all die. And the reason for that is that the tools of life, which are called proteins, would be unable to function because they would lose their normal shape. Okay? Same thing with the nervous system, right? If we were to remove your brain, okay, then we wouldn't be able to respond to stimuli, okay, and we wouldn't be able to generate commands. You would be clinically dead, okay? So all of these systems depend on each other. The first system we want to sort of get an overview of is the integumentary system, and that's your hair, skin, and nails, all right? It's the first thing you see when you look at somebody, and it's a barrier, right? It's a barrier between the inside and the outside of the body. And it also includes the glands in the skin, the sweat glands and the oil glands, which are called sudiferous or sebaceous glands. They secrete and they cleanse the skin, okay, of things like pathogens that might colonize or grow on them. And they also serve as a way to regulate the fluid balance in the body. But skin is also important in regulating body temperature, right? The way it does that is by controlling how much blood is near the surface of the skin, right? There are nerve endings that can talk to the blood vessels in the surface of our skin and cause them to get wider. That's called dilation. And that brings more blood to the surface. And when we do that, that causes us to make more sweat. And that also causes us to lose heat from our blood through a process called radiation, right? As the sweat on our skin turns from a liquid to a gas, it takes energy with it, and that cools the skin, and that cools the blood, and that cools the body. And that's one of the body's ways of maintaining its temperature, okay? The skin is also where we make some of the components that go into vitamin D, which is important in mineralizing bone. And it's also a sensory organ, right? It has nerve endings in it that tell us about things on the skin surface, like pain, touch, tickle, pressure, and so on, okay? And then it's also a major blood reservoir in the body, right? It allows the mobilization of extra blood when and where it's needed, such as when we exercise or when we panic, okay? And then we shove that blood to organs that we're going to use in like a fight or flight situation, which would be things like the heart, the lungs, and the skeletal muscle in order to survive, Your skeletal system is a way to give the body a framework, right? The soft tissues of our body hang over our skeletal system. So we have what's called an endoskeleton. Our hard parts are on the inside. Not all organisms are like that. Some organisms have an exoskeleton in which their hard parts are on the outside, all right? So as our bones grow and increase in size, our soft tissues can grow and stretch to accommodate that, whereas in an organism with an exoskeleton, like a crab or a lobster or an insect, they have to molt. They have to shed their outer coating and have a soft outer coating for a time, and then they have to regrow their hard parts, okay? What does our skeletal system do for us besides give us a framework? Well, it protects a lot of our internal organs. Our brain and brainstem sit inside our cranial cavity. Our spinal cord sits inside our vertebral column. Our heart and lungs sit inside our rib cage, and portions of our reproductive and urinary system sit inside our pelvic girdle, okay? The skeletal system also makes blood, okay? Specifically the axial skeleton, which is the skull, the vertebral column, the ribs, okay? Portions of the appendicular skeleton, such as the pelvic girdle and the pectoral girdle, also make blood. And that is an important process because blood has to be recycled every day. Blood cells die and have to be replaced. And that process of replacing them is called hematopoiesis, all right? In addition, the skeletal system is a mineral storehouse. So it allows us to store or release things like calcium and phosphate and other rare minerals. And it also provides for movement at structures that are called joints, okay? And that allows us to move within our environment and manipulate it, okay? The muscular system allows movement, internal and external, all right? So there's three kinds of muscle: skeletal, cardiac, and smooth. Skeletal muscle we control with our thoughts, and cardiac and smooth work without conscious thought, all right? Skeletal muscle is attached to bone and allows movement at joints. It also generates heat. And cardiac muscle pumps blood. It does not operate with conscious control. And smooth muscle moves things through internal organs, and it's also not under conscious control, okay? The muscle tissue in our body has limited ability to regenerate, all right? So if you damage or tear muscle, it usually gets replaced with scar tissue, and the exception to that is our smooth muscle, right? Cardiac and skeletal muscle both suffer permanent damage when you tear the muscle itself, right? And so that's a property that we'll run into in different tissues and organ systems, is that some of them can repair or regenerate and some of them cannot, right? Your nervous system is basically one of your body's two communication networks. And what it does is it responds to stimuli, which are physical changes in the environment, and it sends out commands, which tell other tissues what to do, okay? So there are stimuli that you're going to be aware of, and those get all the way to a structure called your cerebral cortex, right? And there are stimuli that you're not aware of, and those get dealt with by a structure called the brainstem, okay? And what happens once we receive those pieces of electrical information, the stimuli get converted into electrical information, and then they're dealt with by the cerebral cortex or the brainstem. We send out electrical commands, right? Those electrical commands come down from the brain or the brainstem. They go down the spinal cord, and they go out to peripheral nerves, which are in contact with body tissues, and that causes the tissues to perform some sort of activity, okay? It's a very fast system, but it uses a lot of energy, okay? And it requires a lot of cabling, all right? A lot of wiring here in order to get it to work. The components are the brain, the brainstem, the spinal cord, and the peripheral nerves. The body's other communication network is the endocrine system, all right? So it's not practical to have every stimulus and response in the body be governed by the nervous system, because if we did that, if we wired every cell in the body up to the central nervous system, we would be very large, okay? And we would also be consuming tremendous amounts of energy all the time, and that wouldn't be practical. So the endocrine system is made up of glands in the body, such as the thyroid, the adrenal, the thymus, the pancreas, and so on. What they do is they secrete chemicals into the bloodstream, which are carried around the body by the beating action of the heart. And then when those chemicals arrive at particular tissues, they bind to the receptors and they make those tissues perform an action. All right. And once that action is performed, then those conditions that are created by doing that action usually tell the endocrine organ to stop making that chemical command or to reduce that chemical command. All right. So this regulates growth and reproduction and nutrient use. It regulates metabolism. All right. All sorts of different things. The endocrine system, in comparison to the nervous system, is a bit slower and is a bit more broadly targeted. All right. The cardiovascular system is made up of the heart, the blood vessels, and the blood that they carry. All right. And essentially, the job of the cardiovascular system is to deliver oxygen and nutrients and hormones and immune components to tissues in the body, and to remove waste products, all right, and deliver those to either the urinary system or the respiratory system, all right. We need the oxygen and the nutrients to support life, because we use that to make energy and to build new things. We need the waste products to be removed so we don't generate toxic conditions that kill the cells and tissues. And the other thing, of course, that the cardiovascular system does is it maintains body temperature and body pH, okay? Two very important things. The lymphatic system is a different type of circulatory system, a low pressure system that filters fluid between tissues that gets lost from the circulatory system at structures that are called capillary beds. And what happens is that it moves that fluid through structures that are called lymph nodes, okay? The lymph nodes then filter out cancer cells and pathogens, and then it passes that filtered fluid into the lymphatic system and back to the circulatory system, and that basically clears out things that can cause disease. The components are the red bone marrow, the thymus, the lymphatic vessels, which include capillaries, trunks, and vessels themselves, and ducts, and the spleen, okay, and the thymus, so, and the lymph nodes. So the job is to filter, detect, and then warn. Okay, what are we warning? We're warning our immune system that there's a pathogen inside our body, and to generate an army of white blood cells that can attack the pathogen or any infected tissue and destroy it before we become very sick. Okay, and then there's the respiratory system. Okay, the respiratory system is where we inhale air, which is 20% oxygen. That goes down into the lungs and gets loaded into the blood, the oxygen does, whilst carbon dioxide from the blood